All right, diving into the world of firearms today, we're talking about how they work, the different types, and of course, safety, safety, safety. We're going super basic, using this handbook, kind of like Firearms 101, to build that foundation.
Yeah, gotta have that solid base, just like building a house.
Makes sense. And this handbook, it starts with, like, the anatomy of a firearm, breaks it down into barrel, action, and stock, like the basic skeleton, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah, each part with a job to do, working together. Think of the barrel now, that's the highway. The bullet or shot, that's what travels through the barrel, to the target.
Okay, so barrel's the path. What about the action then?
That's the heart of it all. It's the mechanism that makes the whole firing sequence work, really gets things going.
Got it. So path and the engine, what does the stock do?
Control, all about control. That's how you hold it steady, how you aim.
Right, makes sense. Now, there's this thing, a little detail I found called the data stamp on the barrel. It can tell you what kind of ammo the firearm's supposed to use.
It's like a built-in cheat sheet. But seriously, you got to pay attention to that. Using the wrong ammo, that's dangerous, man. Like putting diesel in a gas engine. Bad news.
So, like, if I'm buying ammo, how do I use that data stamp to get the right stuff?
It'll tell you the caliber or gauge that matches the ammo. Might even say something about the pressure it can handle. Matching them up, that's key.
See, this is why I love these deep dives.
Mm-hmm.
Always something new. Okay, so barrel's the path. Let's get into the action now, the real heart of things. Handbook talks about the trigger, safeties, and the magazine.
Each one, critical role in how it all works.
All right, so break it down. What does what?
The trigger, that's what starts it all. Pull the trigger, and boom, firing sequence kicks off. Safeties, though, they're there to stop accidents, like brakes on a car. Gotta have them.
And the magazine.
Think of that as the storage unit. Hold those cartridges, the bullets or shot shells, ready to go.
Okay, this is where it gets cool for me. The handbook says some safeties, they can be decocking levers too. So they block the trigger and can lower the hammer safely without hitting the firing pin. Like a 2-for-1 safety feature?
Smart design adds that extra layer of security. But here's the thing. Safeties, they can fail. Never just rely on that to prevent an accident.
Like wearing a seatbelt.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you can drive crazy, right? Still gotta be careful.
Exactly. Awareness, being in control, that's key with firearms, just like driving.
Which brings us to those vital 4 ACTS of firearm safety, right? Control the muzzle direction at all times and keep your finger off the trigger, outside the guard, till ready to shoot.
Those are the non-negotiables. Muzzle pointing, that's where the bullet goes if it fires.
Yes.
And your finger, nowhere near that trigger unless you're firing, period.
Got those rules burned in my brain now. Trigger, safeties, safety rules, check. Now, what actually happens when that trigger gets pulled, that firing sequence?
All right, picture this. You pull that trigger, releases the firing mechanism, which lets the firing pin go bam, like a tiny hammer.
And what does it hit?
The primer. It's at the back of the cartridge, a tiny, sensitive, explosive cap.
So that's the spark that starts the whole thing.
Bingo. Firing pin hits the primer, boom, ignites the gunpowder inside. Now, that gunpowder burns super fast, creates tons of hot gas, and guess what? That gas pushing outwards, that's what forces the bullet or the shot down the barrel and out to the target.
It's like a whole chain reaction happening so fast. From pulling the trigger to the bullet flying out.
Amazing engineering, right? Blink of an eye and it's done.
All right, so we got how it works. What about all the different kinds out there? This handbook focuses on the 2 most common non-restricted ones, shotguns and rifles.
Yeah, and within those 2, you've got different action types, like the operating systems of the firearm world.
Right. It lists, let me see, muzzleloader, hinge, bolt, lever, pump, and semi-automatic. Muzzleloaders, those are like the originals from way back, right?
Oh yeah, the OGs. You had to load them from the front, the muzzle, slow process, kind of clunky. Cool piece of history, but compared to, say, a semi-automatic, they're dinosaurs, man.
So like rotary phone versus smartphone, got it. But hold on, this handbook mentions multi-barreled firearms. What's that about?
Ah, those are the heavy hitters, literally. 2, sometimes even 3 barrels on one gun. Mostly shotguns, but you get combo guns too, with a shotgun and rifle barrel together.
Wait, so it's like having 2-3 guns in one.
Kinda, yeah. They've got their own special uses, like hunting or sport shooting, where you might need a bunch of shots ready to go.
So you got the single-shot muzzle loaders on one end, then these like multi-barrel beasts on the other. Seems like there's a firearm for every purpose.
And understanding those actions, how they work, how that affects what you use them for, that's important for any firearm owner.
Before we go further, got to touch on the legal side. This handbook talks about the three classes in Canada: non-restricted, restricted, and prohibited.
And the rules, they get stricter depending on which class we're talking about. Prohibited firearms, well, those have the toughest controls, like you'd expect.
Makes sense. But this one blew my mind. Some air guns, they can actually count as firearms under Canadian law?
It's true. So, same safety rules, same regulations, all that applies.
Wait, so those BB guns, like from when I was a kid, those could be actual firearms?
Some of them, yeah. Depends on the model, how powerful it is. Point is, anything launching a projectile with enough force to hurt someone, you got to treat it with the same respect as any other firearm.
Good reminder that we're not just talking, hunting rifles here. Anything that shoots, basically.
Yep.
And that leads us to the third and fourth ACTS of firearm safety, yeah?
Yep, you got it. Number 3, see that the firearm is unloaded, prove it safe. And number 4, always treat every firearm with the respect due a loaded gun.
Okay, those sound simple enough. But what does proving it safe actually mean?
It's not just assuming it's empty. Got to check that chamber and the feeding path, even look down the barrel. Got to be sure there's no ammo in there.
So it's my responsibility, not just trusting someone else already did it.
You're holding it, so you're responsible. And that 4th ACT about treating it like it's loaded, that means even if you know it's safe, you still handle it like it could fire.
Always being cautious, even when you think you don't have to be.
Exactly. Making those safe habits automatic, almost like a muscle memory.
Okay, starting to see a pattern here. Being a responsible firearm owner, it's about being proactive, not waiting for something bad to happen, right?
You got it. Knowledge, awareness, and a whole lot of respect for the power of these tools. That's what it's all about.
Man, a lot to take in. But I feel way more confident already. Anatomy, types, safety rules, we hit it all.
Yeah.
But there's got to be more, right?
Oh, tons more. We've just scratched the surface. Next time, we'll dig deeper into safety, like storage, handling practices, how to react in different situations, all that.
Can't wait. Stick with us. So before we jumped into that break,
Yeah.
we were talking about the those vital 4 ACTS of firearm safety and how they're for all kinds of firearms, even those air guns.
Yeah.
Safety is always important, right?
No doubt about it. Big rifle, little BB gun, doesn't matter. Same safe handling every time.
It's funny. We always hear gun safety, but this handbook, it's specific about saying firearm safety. Is there a difference, really?
Yeah, it's about being precise. Firearm, that covers more stuff like those air guns we talked about. So firearm safety, it's kind of, it's a bigger category. Make sure we remember the rules apply no matter what.
It's like saying fruit versus apple. Apple's a fruit, but not all fruit's an apple.
Exactly. Firearm safety, that's the whole basket. Gun safety is just one piece.
Okay, got it. So we get firearm anatomy, the action types, those vital 4 ACTS. It's a lot. But what about all the other stuff to stay safe? What else is in this handbook?
Big one is storage. Huge, especially if you got kids around. Firearms, unloaded, locked up tight, separate from the ammo. Always.
Out of sight, out of mind, right? Or maybe out of reach is more like it.
Yeah, layers of protection. That's how you stop accidents, the kind we hear about way too often,
Speaking of which, they talk about a safety check here. What is that exactly?
Thing you do every time you pick up a firearm. Every single time. Make sure it's safe before you even think about doing anything else.
More than just seeing if it's loaded, then.
Way more. Look it over for damage, anything broken, make sure that action works smooth, safety on if you ain't shooting, all that.
Like a pilot doing their pre-flight check.
It's a perfect comparison. You wouldn't fly in a plane if they skipped that, right? Firearms, same deal. Make sure everything's good to go before you start messing around.
I think that same idea again.
Mm.
Proactive, not waiting for something to go wrong, right?
Yeah, that's it. Knowing the rules isn't enough. Got to use them every time. Get complacent. That's when things get dangerous.
This handbook, it also says, got to know your target and what's behind it. Why is that so important?
Because bullets, they don't just stop, They can go a long way through walls, fences, whatever's in the way.
So even if I'm aiming at something safe, it could keep going and hit something I didn't mean to.
That's it. Got to know what's downrange, take responsibility for every shot.
Like chess, you got to think a few moves ahead.
Love that analogy. Thinking about what might happen, that's key before you pull that trigger.
Now, they also talk about eye and ear protection. That seems obvious, but why is it such a big deal?
Well, guns are loud, man. Seriously, it can mess up your hearing real bad if you ain't careful. And then there's debris, bits of metal, stuff flying around when you fire.
So it's not just, comfort. It's protecting yourself from, real damage, maybe permanent damage.
You got it. Right eye in your probe. Easy thing to do, but it's huge in the long run.
It makes me think about all the movies, TV shows where they're just blasting away without any ear protection. Seems so dumb now.
Yeah, Hollywood doesn't always get it right. It's all action, excitement. They forget about the real risks.
Right. So we got storage, safety checks, knowing the target, using protection. That's a lot. Any other safety tips from this handbook?
One that people forget is no alcohol or drugs when you're handling firearms. Seriously.
Yeah, that's common sense, right?
You'd think so, but it's a problem. Alcohol, drugs, they mess with your judgment, your coordination, how fast you react. And with a firearm, you need all those things working right.
It's like that warning label on pills, you know? Don't operate heavy machinery.
Exactly. Firearms, they're not toys, man.
Yeah.
Not something to mess around with if you're not thinking straight.
You know, it's amazing how much of this comes back to just like basic common sense. Being responsible, being aware, thinking ahead.
It all connects, yeah. Safety rules, they're pretty universal. Driving, using tools, firearms, it's all about being informed, being ready, never getting too comfortable.
This deep dive, it's really making that clear. I feel like I'm getting a whole new understanding of, firearms and what it means to own one, use one safely.
That's what we're going for. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to staying safe.
All right, so we did firearm safety top to bottom.
Yeah.
But what about the actual laws in Canada? What do I actually have to do legally to own a firearm?
Great question, and that's exactly what we're getting into next. The Canadian Firearms Act, all the licensing, registration stuff, the different categories of firearms. We'll break it all down.
Sounds like we're getting to the real nitty-gritty of firearm ownership in Canada. Ready when you are.
Let's do it.
Okay, time to tackle the legal stuff now. The Canadian Firearms Act, right? Always seemed kind of complicated to me, all those rules. But maybe we can, make it a little clearer today.
Yeah, it can be a bit overwhelming, I get that. But the Firearms Act, it's actually meant to be pretty straightforward, The main thing is public safety, but also respecting people's rights to own firearms legally.
Right, right. Okay, so what's the main point of it all? What's the Firearms Act actually do?
Think of it like the rule book,
Yeah.
For everything about firearms in Canada, what kinds there are, the licensing and registration, what happens if you break the law, it's all in there.
So like the Constitution for owning a firearm here.
That's a good way to put it. It's the foundation for all the other rules.
This handbook, it says you need a license to actually, have a firearm, use it in Canada. What's that process like? How do you even get one?
It's a multi-step thing. Got to make sure anyone handling a firearm is, trained properly, screened, all that. You got to take a safety course, pass a written test, background check, provide references.
Whoa, so it's not just like going to the store and buying a fishing license.
Nah, it's a whole deal. Takes time, takes effort. It's showing you understand, that owning a firearm, it comes with responsibilities.
The handbook also mentions registration. Is that separate?
Yeah, registration, that's extra, and it's only for certain types. Non-restricted, like your basic hunting rifles and shotguns, most of those don't need registration. But restricted, prohibited firearms, those got to be registered with the Canadian Firearms Program.
So more serious the firearm, more hoops to jump through, basically.
That's the idea. The thinking is, more dangerous a firearm could be, the more careful we got to be about who has access to it. Keep everyone safe.
Speaking of which, let's talk about those different types.
Sure.
This handbook, it mentions the 3 categories: non-restricted, restricted, prohibited.
Mm.
What makes a firearm, fall into each one?
All right, well, it's all about how it's designed, what it does. Non-restricted, those are usually your hunting rifles, shotguns, that kind of thing. Longer barrels, not easy to hide,
So those are the ones that are like less likely to be used, for bad stuff.
Yeah, in general, that's the thinking. But gotta remember, any firearm can be dangerous if it's not handled right. Doesn't matter what category it's in, safety rules are always the same.
Okay, so what about restricted firearms? What makes them different?
Those usually include handguns and some semi-automatics, rifles and shotguns that are kind of on the edge because of how they're designed, more compact, easier to conceal, you know what I mean?
So they're watched more closely because they could, be used for crime more easily.
That's part of it, yeah. The
Wow.
rules are there to limit who can get those, make sure they're only going to people who, meet the requirements, passed all the checks.
And then you got the prohibited ones. What are those exactly?
Prohibited, those are the serious stuff. Fully automatic firearms, sawed-off shotguns, anything that's specifically named as banned. Those are considered the most dangerous, so the rules are the toughest.
So most people in Canada, they can't even own those, right?
Right. There are some exceptions, like for museums or some collectors, but they got to meet, very specific rules. For
Oh.
most folks, yeah, prohibited firearms are they're a no-go.
This whole system, the Firearms Act, it seems, I don't know, kind of complicated.
Yeah.
But it sounds like it's, well-designed, trying to balance things out, rights and safety and all that.
That's the goal,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think for the most part, it works. People who want to own firearms use them responsibly, they can, but at the same time, it makes it way harder for the bad guys to get their hands on them.
This deep dive has been honestly eye-opening. I feel like I get it now, how firearms work, the laws, all that.
That's great to hear. Knowledge is key, especially when it comes to safety. The more you know, the better decisions you can make. Keep yourself and everyone else safe.
We've covered a ton today, but this is probably just the start for you, right? There's so much to learn about firearms, you could spend a lifetime and still not know it all.
It's a fascinating topic, that's for sure. This deep dive, it was like your Firearms 101. What parts interested you the most? What questions do you still have? Use those to guide you. Keep learning, keep exploring.
So, what will your next deep dive into the world of firearms be? So many paths to choose from. Until then, stay safe and stay curious.